if you're in Tokyo, and good morning in London, and really good morning if you are in the United States. I am aware of a couple of people being up really early in the US to watch us. This is the meeting on Africa, Japan, and the UK, Emerging Partnerships Beyond Summits. As you all know, Japan established its Tokyo International Conference on African Development, TICAD, in 1993, a model that was followed by others and saw a growing number of high-level summits in Africa, including in China, India, Turkey, and Russia. TICAD VII was held in August 2019, last year, in Yokohama, which sought to strengthen partnerships between Japan and Africa in three main areas: technical cooperation, business, women's entrepreneurship, and next generation and people-to-people connectivity. The first UK-Africa Investment Summit was held in January 2020, this year, and highlighted similar themes, with an emphasis on investing to generate sustainable growth and create jobs. In an increasingly multipolar world, with a greater need for international cooperation in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, shared goals and interests among various African countries, Japan and the UK could bring opportunities for fruitful trilateral and multilateral cooperation. The TICAD journey is something that the Africa program at Chatham House is focused on for many years. The first time we engaged on analyzing TICAD was with the TICAD III process, and we've continued ever since. In fact, in TICAD IV, one of my colleagues, Elizabeth Donnelly, traveled to Japan and monitored the progress of that summit. So I'm very delighted today to be partnering with the Embassy of Japan to provide you this discussion about Africa, Japan, and the UK emerging partnerships beyond summits. This meeting is fully on the record. It's not under the Chatham House rule. We will provide an opportunity later for Q&A, or indeed, if you want to put your hand up, we will permit you by unmuting you to ask a question. And we have a very strong group of panelists this morning. They are Professor Nahori Kitano, who is the visiting fellow of the Ogata Sadako Research Institute for Peace and Development of JICA, and he's also a professor at Waseda University. We have Paul Arkwright, who's just now an independent consultant, suddenly free of UK government, but he has been a UK High Commissioner to Nigeria. He has also just recently relinquished the role of being UK Regional Ambassador for Sub-Saharan Africa for the COP26 Climate Summit that will take place in Glasgow in the United Kingdom next year. We have Dr. Falajadi Soleh, who's a Senior Research Associate at the Black-Vinnick School of Government, University of Oxford. And we have Masa Sugana, who's the Deputy Executive Director of the Japan External Trade Organization, JETRO, for the Africa region. We'll be hearing from all of them very, very shortly. And again, I'm very grateful for everybody who's listening to us from Japan. So good evening to you, and good morning to those in Europe and those who are joining us very early from the United States. So with no more ado, I want to hand over to our first speaker, who is, as I've mentioned, Professor Nahori Kitano, and he is the visiting fellow with the Ogata Sadako Research Institute for Peace and Development at the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, JICA. He's agreed to speak about from Yokohama to Tunis. Indeed, Tunis is where the next TICAD summit will be held, and towards the future of Japan-Africa cooperation. Professor Kitano, thank you for agreeing to speak. We did try and host you at Chatham House in March, but COVID stopped us. The lockdown happened just a couple of days before the TICAD meeting that we were going to hold with you. But it's lovely to see you, and please, I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you. Professor Kitano.
Thank you very much. Dear Alex, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And I thank you very much for inviting me to this event. It is my great honor to speak at Chatham House. And I have a British and an African colleague at my university. They are very delighted that I attend today's event. So let me share my screen. So the TICAD started in 1993 and has been serving as a pioneering open and inclusive multilateral forum for international cooperation on African development. TICAD has inspired other countries to host similar fora, as Alex has just described. And last year, the Japanese government co-hosted TICAD VII with the United Nations, UNDP, the World Bank, and African Union Commission. And 53 African countries participated. I also attended this event. And the 2019 Yokohama Declaration and Yokohama Plan of Actions were adopted. There are three pillars of Japan's contribution to Africa under TICAD VII, namely economy, society, and peace and stability. Let me just focus on economy. Economy includes the promotion of innovation and investment and human resources development in industrial sectors, as well as investment in quality infrastructure to enhance connectivity. What is significant in TICAD VII is the positioning of business at the center of TICAD. Specific measures were announced for the promotion of Japanese companies' business in Africa, including the launch of Japan Business Council for Africa and a number of financial and support measures by government institutions such as JETRO, JICA, JBIC, and NEXI. Let me introduce two examples of Africa, the UK, and Japan partnership. The first case is regarding investing in quality infrastructure to enhance connectivity. Among other Japanese major construction companies, Shimizu Corporation, founded in 1804, have been active in Africa since 1967. Shimizu, in a collaboration with the UK digital mapping company Gaist, have started the first survey of Japan's road network. By using artificial intelligence and other cutting-edge technologies, Gaist provides services for capturing and analyzing a previously unimaginable level of detailed data regarding road networks. In TICAD VII, Shimizu Gaist concluded an MOU with Uganda National Roads Authority and Kampala Capital City Authority, pursuing to provide highly efficient infrastructure maintenance service as public-private partnership. Every detail of the country's network will be mapped from surface texture to risk factors, cracking types, and material loss. In that way, Japan-UK partnership could contribute to the African growth through quality infrastructure investment. The second case is regarding ensuring sustainable urban development. Over 100 years ago, to deal with the serious urban problems in large cities such as London, the English urban planner Ebenezer Howard created the concept of garden city and initiated its movement. In this method of urban planning, a series of small, planned, and self-contained cities are created. Those cities would combine the amenities of urban life with the ready access to rural environments. Japanese industrialists learned the concept of garden city from the UK in early 20th century. Private sector railway operators developed garden cities as suburban housing developments along the new railway lines. So this approach is called the development of the areas along railways, or Ensen Kaihatsu Ike in Japanese. This approach is also called transit-oriented development, TOD. Now Japan is seeking the possibility of introducing the TOD concept to African cities, including to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Revision of Dar es Salaam Urban Transport Master Plan was made by JICA, envisioning the transit-oriented megacity by 2040. According to my colleague who recently obtained a master's degree from Glasgow University, boosting the supply of affordable housing is one of the key issues that should be considered. In July this year, the then Japanese Chief Cabinet Secretary, Yoshihide Suga, and now Japanese Prime Minister, said that the Republic of Tunisia will host TICAD VIII to be held in 2022. This will be the second TICAD summit level meeting to take place in Africa since Kenya hosted TICAD VI in Nairobi in August 2016. Tunisia-Japan cooperation includes dispatching volunteers since 1975, provision of ODA loans for a bridge and highways. Africa is a continent with a huge development potential, undergoing significant transformation along with the African Union's Agenda 2063 and toward achieving SDGs. At the same time, Africa is currently facing a serious human security crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which threatened people's lives, their survival, livelihood, and dignity. Over the last quarter of the century, Japan has been supporting the mid to long-term development of the health and medical system in Africa through TICAD. Towards the TICAD VIII, Japan will continue to work with a view to realizing universal health coverage in Africa for the protection and empowerment of each and every individual based on the concept of human security with the objective of leaving no one's health behind, and the principles of African ownership and international partnership. So I could argue that human security is now in the DNA of Japan's development cooperation. Specifically, Japan will continue to provide assistance with the aim to first strengthen Africa's capacity to respond to COVID-19, including promoting development and ensuring equitable access of vaccines in partnership with international organizations such as Gavi. Second, building resilient and inclusive health and medical system, such as support for Kenya Medical Research Institute and promotion of maternal and child health handbook in Ghana. And third, responding to socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19. As this map shows, by 2100, over 80% of the population will reside in Africa and Asia. Africa is definitely a very important continent for Japan in terms of trade and investment, as well as people-to-people exchange. However, for many Japanese, Africa is still somewhere far away. There is a geographical concept of Africa and Asia called Afrasia. This concept was originally created by British historian Arnold Toynbee, who was the director of studies in Chatham House. This geographical concept, Afrasia, could help overcome many of the psychological barriers facing the Japanese. Africa is the neighbor continent of Asia. This may represent a conceptual triangular relationship between Japan, Africa, and the UK, Chatham House. In conclusion, we are facing serious challenges, including COVID-19. However, this may represent an opportunity. There is much space for future cooperation between Africa, the UK, and Japan. Interaction between Afrasia and UK-Africa may bring about new concepts, new ideas, and new Africa, the UK-Japan partnership towards the next century. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Kitano, for describing the journey from Yokohama to Tunis and looking at the future possibilities of Japan-Africa cooperation, including drawing the expertise and thinking from the past, including Professor Toynbee at Chatham House. But that was a surprise. I was not expecting that at all. Let's move to our second speaker, who is Paul Arkwright, now an independent consultant of the Arkwright Advisory Limited, but he has been the UK Regional Ambassador for Sub-Saharan Africa at COP26, the climate summit in Glasgow next year. He's also a long-serving British diplomat with a number of postings around the world. Lagos as High Commissioner was one, but he has also been the British Ambassador to the Netherlands and Director for Multilateral Policy at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, as it was known then. Obviously, it is now the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. Paul, thank you very much for agreeing to speak today and to talk to us about the UK-Africa Investment Summit and approaches to engagement. Paul Arkwright, after Lagos, after Abuja, was very involved in the build-up to the UK-Africa Investment Summit. So I can think of nobody better to describe that the build up to that summit and then approaches to engagement. Paul, over to you.
Thanks very much, Alex. It's very good to be back with friends in Chatham House and with our friends in Japan and around the world. Ohayo gozaimasu, or konbanwa, I should say. Before I joined the Foreign Office, I spent 2 years teaching English in Tokyo. So Japan has a place in my heart, very much so. Yes, I was the CEO of the UK Africa Investment Summit until November 2019. And so I was involved in the initiation of it when Theresa May came to Nigeria, to Kenya, and to South Africa in the summer in August of 2018. And in Cape Town, at that time, she made an important speech, which you can find on the gov.uk website, which was about how the UK should look in the future at our relationship with Africa, how we should engage more, perhaps beyond our what you might call traditional or historical ties in Africa, strengthen those ties. And part of that speech, one of the key elements of that speech was the proposal to host in London a UK Africa Investment Summit. The idea was that that would happen in 2019. For various reasons, it was pushed back a little bit, and it happened in January 2020. So the point of that was to look at both the UK's added value. What is our USP? Where can we be a bit different? Where can we use not just our historical ties, but also our future-looking, forward-looking skill sets? So we were looking at how we could make the UK Africa Investment Summit different from many other summits. And we've heard, thanks to the professor, about TICAD. There are many others which Alex has mentioned at the beginning, the Russians, the Chinese, of course, with FOCAC, the French, the Germans. Lots of people are interested in Africa. How could we as the UK really try to make something which looked and felt and delivered something different? So we were focused on our particular strengths, the UK strengths, and Africa's needs. Africa's needs are many, but I would suggest that one of them, and probably the most important, given the demographics that we expect in Africa, is youth unemployment. It's about creation of jobs. So we wanted to focus on very practical ways in which we could focus on jobs. We decided to limit the agenda. We only had one day. We couldn't have a very, very widespread agenda with lots of different sessions. So we focused on a few key areas. One of them was financial services. That was building on the strengths of the City of London in particular, which has acted and continues to act in many ways as Africa's hub for capital and for finding investors from the City of London. Looking in particular as well at green investment. We wanted the summit to be as green, as sustainable as possible. The second, and linked to that, was around energy, what's known as the energy transition, moving beyond dependence on oil and gas and into renewable energy in particular, and off-grid solutions. So there was quite a lot of focus on solar, on wind, on hydro, and the opportunities in Africa for that. Agriculture, the third key area, crucially important in Africa, not least, of course, as a major employer and creator of jobs. And where I came from most recently in Nigeria, the focus on agriculture is very striking. But how can we add value to agriculture? How can we make sure that agriculture isn't just subsistence farming, but actually is something which adds value, which ultimately can lead to exports and the increase in prosperity for the country. And finally, and in a part linked to financial services, is the whole tech enabling, telecoms, digitalization, agri-tech, fintech, all of those areas where, again, the UK has leading edge, cutting edge, leading companies that could help to identify investment opportunities and then try to convert those opportunities into actual investment. We wanted youth to be involved. We wanted women to be involved. Women's voices everywhere, but not least in Africa, are not heard enough. So we ensured that on every platform, at every session, there were women there, there were women moderators, women panelists. But more importantly than that, we brought in women entrepreneurs from Africa. We encouraged the women's entrepreneurs movement in Africa to attend and to set out their stall. We wanted to make it as green as possible, as sustainable. This is about sustainable investment. And of course, we are now, or next year, hosting COP26, which will be an important element of that. And we wanted to address those most pressing needs in Africa. That is partly around sustainability. It's about land use, sustainable land use. It's about education and skills, and all of that bound up with this crucially important challenge in Africa of creating jobs and growth. So these are ambitious objectives. We had limited time to prepare. We had limited capacity in terms of the venues in London. There are not, actually, you'd be surprised, not that many venues in London that can have 5,000 plus delegates. We took a decision early on, a controversial decision, to limit the number of countries invited. In the end, that was 21. I can go into the reasons behind that in the Q&A if you're interested, but it was partly around practicalities and capacity, but also around looking beyond our, as I said, our traditional areas where the UK has been involved, inviting francophone countries, inviting lusophone countries, inviting presidents, heads of state and government who would not normally get an invitation to London, let's say. And I think we were successful in that. Of the 21 countries invited, 16 were represented by presidents. We wanted to make it at a high level, head of state and government level, but we also, and this was a difficult trick to pull off, yes, it was a political platform to give opportunities for presidents to set out their case for investment in their country, but we needed to make it a practical nuts and bolts conference, as somebody called it, where deals could be made in the margins, where governments and investors could come together and look at very specific opportunities. So again, we set up a sort of marketplace in the margins of the summit to ensure that the right people were getting together to look at those opportunities and turn the interest into something which was quite concrete. Were we successful? I mean, I know a number of you who are on this call were there. You will make your own judgment. I would say that it was high level. As I said, 16 presidents, which is a very good turnout on a cold day in January in London. Deals were indeed done. So 6.5 billion pounds of commercial deals on the day were agreed, and a further 8.9 billion pounds of further investment commitments were made. And, you know, I attended, by that stage, I was actually acting ambassador in the DRC, and I attended with the President Tshisekedi. And it had a nice feel. I think it was an inclusive feel. I think people were able to mix. That was an important element of how we presented it, that it was not just the high level and the plenary sessions, but an opportunity for civil society, for youth, for governments, investors, and African businesses to get together. And I do feel that that was a success. So we achieved that, but then came COVID. And that was a huge challenge in terms of the follow-up. As you know, that COVID has had a massive impact on health, certainly, but more particularly on the economic prospects for Africa. And turning those opportunities into concrete investments has proved challenging. But with the excellent team in DIT, under the leadership of Emma Wade-Smith, our Trade Commissioner for Africa, we've set up a number of initiatives which flowed from the summit. One of them is the establishment of an Africa Investors Group, co-chaired by Emma Wade-Smith and Andrew Skipper of Hogan Lovells, the legal firm. They are providing strategic advice on the direction in which we should be heading and where we should be focusing our efforts. Secondly, a new overseas direct investment, or ODI strategy has been established, identifying opportunities and barriers and looking at tackling those barriers, and coordinating engagement between governments, businesses in Africa and in the UK, and of course the investors who still see the potential in Africa. We've set up what's known as an online deal room. That's with Asoko Insight. So far, over $750 million worth of deals have been agreed through that online deal room, which is proving, I think, very successful and a pioneer, a role model for similar initiatives. So Emma and her team across Africa, in 20 countries across Africa, are working hard to ensure that we do convert those opportunities. And finally, a word about what I've been doing most recently, which is the COP26 summit. This is particularly relevant, I think, in Africa, and something where, again, there'll be increased focus as we approach COP26 in Glasgow in November next year, looking at things such as energy transition. That was one of the themes of the Africa Investment Summit. It's also one of the key campaigns in the UK's COP26 agenda, looking at sustainable land use, so nature-based solutions, as it's called, so the forests, and how can we make the most of the forests, recognizing that they provide livelihoods, but they also need to be protected. Adaptation and resilience, how can Africa bounce back from climate shocks? Access to finance, climate finance is a key barrier, really, an obstacle, a challenge in Africa to helping them move and address the climate change challenges. And finally, transport, where we've heard a lot recently, including, of course, in the UK, about electric vehicles, zero emission vehicles, also an opportunity for Africa. And I would say all of that important agenda also has trade and investment opportunities attached to it. And looking at ways in which we can use the impetus, the momentum from the Africa Investment Summit, carrying it forward to the COP26 and possibly UK Africa Investment Summit too. I'm not in government anymore, so I'm not quite sure if that's going to come off, but I'm sure that lots of thought is being given to how we can follow up. There are challenges there, but there are also massive opportunities. And finally, talking about Japan, I was very pleased to see that the professor had looked at ways in which the UK and Japan can work together, collaborate on African projects. And I like the examples that he gave. I'm sure there are many more of those. And working very closely with the Trade Commissioner for Asia and our trade team in the British Embassy in Tokyo, I'm sure that more of those opportunities to work together and collaborate in Africa will be forthcoming in the next year. Thank you very much, Alex. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Paul, for describing the UK Africa Investment Summit and the preparations for it, and your view of the approaches to future engagement and indeed triangulation. I certainly have a few questions, which I'll come back to you in the Q&A session. So we will move on now to our next speaker, who is Dr. Folajde Stole, who's the Senior Research Associate at the Blavatnik School of Government, University of Oxford. Dr. Folajde is going to talk about African agency in international summitry. So we've heard about what Japan can do, what the UK can do, what triangulation of external partners can do in terms of partnering with Africa, but we haven't yet heard about African agency and how African countries, states respond to this. So I'm really delighted today to be introducing Folajde to you. And I do know that we have at least 25 African countries that are registered to listen to today's discussion, individuals from those countries that have registered to participate in this meeting. So I'm sure in the Q&A, we will have quite a few African opinions also about what Africa, Japan, and the UK means to them. So with no more ado, Dr. Folajde, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Africa Plus One summits, meetings, forums, or any other form of summitry, bringing together the continent's presidents, ministers, but also high-level officials with their traditional partners like the UK, Japan, but also with emerging and aspiring partners, but also with multilateral organizations, have become a recurrent pattern. in Africa's international relations. Whether these meetings are focused on trade, investment, discussing security matters, or just creating platforms to promote a new relationship, they demonstrate that the continent, as my predecessors have said, is subject of rising interest. And so many have dubbed this, at least in many news outlets, as the new scramble for Africa, echoing the initial scramble and the colonial competition for territorial establishment in the 19th century and the Berlin Conference. I think that this characterization is very limited, and instead of focusing how external power rivalry is taking place on the continent, I think, and that's what I'll do, I think it's important to reverse the question by investigating the motives and the strategies behind African leaders' engagement in these summits. This aspect is less addressed in the debates. And so the objective here is also to debunk the assumption often associated with this narrative that African governments and leaders are not choosing their partners strategically and wisely. The focus on agency here is to put African actors, as agents at the center of this diplomatic activity, instead of just analyzing the continent as a commodity subject to competition. And that's why the focus on agency is particularly relevant, as it allows us to understand how African actors exercise their capacity also to do. So this presentation will answer the following question. What are the motives behind African leaders' increased engagement in Africa +1 summitry? And to what extent does it serve their country's interest and also sometimes for some leaders, their personal interest? So as you all know, Africa's global attractiveness is growing, although disparately. And African actors are variably using summit diplomacy and the competition among external powers as a means to orient this interest to 4 specific strategies. First, to attract investments in a competitive environment. Secondly, to diversify economic partners and to reduce dependency on a few ones. And thirdly, to claim back more economic policy space. And the last one, to escape for some, at least, from temporarily from political isolation and by getting more visibility and expanding networks. So in terms of attracting investments, that has become a common priority, subject to competition among African countries. Although FDI flows to Africa in 2018 rose to 46 billion, which is an increase of 11% of the previous years, Africa remains the continent that attracts the smallest portion of global investment. And so among the 20 countries that are topping FDI inflows and outflows, none is located in Africa. And moreover, FDI flows in Africa are very much located in top 5 recipients. In 2018, these were Egypt, South Africa, Congo, Morocco, and Ethiopia. And so in this context, African countries are in competition to attract foreign investment, and the multiplication of this summitry offers a venue to promote their countries as the best environment for this investment. If you take the example of Kenya, this priority is part of the new Kenya investment policy, KIP, launched in 2019, but was also rhetorically expressed by the Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta at the trade meeting, the US-Kenya trade meeting in February 2020, when he noted that Kenya specifically is not just a gateway to African markets, but is also a platform of skills, entrepreneurships, stability, and the rule of law. Similarly, this priority is also shared by Francophone African countries like Senegal, whose President Macky Sall has also been promoting Senegal's reputation as one of Africa's most politically stable countries, enjoying one of the continent's fastest economic growth rates, and also demonstrating by that a commitment to improving the business climate. And so this has led the Senegalese president and his ministry to attend also many Africa Plus One summits and to seek investments. So as such, various African countries are trying to position themselves as regional economic hubs. And this competition is not only economic, but also political. African politicians and political parties need to demonstrate their capacity to deliver their electoral promises, and providing hard infrastructure to targeted communities and localities becomes a key determinant for these political actors also to gain more votes. And whether that is in democratic or autocratic settings, this priority is the same overall. Secondly, besides attracting investment, African governments also seek to diversify partners, as part of their quest for autonomy strategy. And by quest for autonomy, I refer to an emphasis on trade diversification policies in order not to be reliant on one or two partners, whether these are traditional but also new partners or re-emerging partners. For instance, not being heavily reliant on China for infrastructure funding is also a priority for other African countries. The Togolese government representatives have been voicing, concerns about the lack of technology transfer in some of the China-funded infrastructure projects. And the president of Guinea also has cautioned against relying too much on one partner, like in this case, China, in mining projects. So for African governments, getting closer to other rising partners, whether traditional or not, has become the strategy to do more partner diversification, and as it offers several opportunities to reduce dependency, but also get better deal conditions, by sometimes pitching these countries one against the other. Thirdly, claiming back economic policy space is also a strategy, because these summits offer a venue to express various concerns, and African leaders have been using them to voice how global rules, for instance, currently restrict the ability to enhance their economic attractiveness and directly constrains their policy space in such as debt contracting, but also rating agency policies. And finally, summits have both a symbolic and substantive component. Attending a summit allows these political leaders to focus the attention of the world. They are a venue to raise one's political profile and to serve foreign policy as well as domestic goals. It allows African leaders, especially those who need it, to show stature and to attract global attention by being seen also on an international stage, and also offer a platform to express, power or sovereignty in a clear and visible manner, sometimes something that quiet diplomacy would not offer. So just to conclude on my presentation and provide a few recommendations, at an investment forum last October, Macky Sall, president of Senegal, mentioned, I quote, "Africans today know exactly what their priorities are, and partners will gain a lot in listening deeply to Africa and Africans." So it's important for the UK, Japan, but also any other partner to build a strategy that is aligned on African countries' priorities, and especially their strategic priorities as enunciated in their national development plans, which have become their roadmap for development. Infrastructure development, health, industrialization policies, the fight against poverty are seen as interlinked and are central to them and viewed as a priority. Secondly, each partner has its competitive advantages, and Japan, the UK have been strategic partners to many African countries. It is important to provide African leaders with partnerships of common interests. And finally, innovative mechanisms, and my predecessors mentioned this a bit, innovative mechanisms such as increased trilateral or triangular cooperation have become also an important feature of development cooperation. And Japan via JICA, but also the UK have both been actively involved in these forms of mechanism. And I think this is something that could be or should be pursued, not only in development cooperation, but also through innovative business and public-private partnerships. So thank you very much. And I look forward to any questions you may have.
Dr. Falajde, thank you very much for that presentation, talking about the importance of listening to Africans, understanding what African states, what their priorities are, including drawing attention to the importance of understanding what their national development plans, what the vision is within those, and outlining also the importance of innovative mechanisms, triangulism, which is something that we've been discussing and are discussing today. I'm very hopeful that we'll come back to these and explore them in greater depth in the Q&A. So finally, the final presentation before we do have a chance for a conversation is the presentation by Masafumi Sugano, who is the Africa representative at the Japan External Trade Organization, JETRO, Japan's Trade and Investment Promotion Agency. You might like to know that he spent his childhood in Côte d'Ivoire and later joined the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry in 2001 after graduation from Harvard University. From 2009 to 12, he served as the first secretary and head of economic affairs at the Japanese embassy in South Africa. And in 2012 to 14, he helped to organize TICAD V as a director for Africa at the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. So Masa's agreed to talk about charting the shift towards private sector engagement in Africa and has a front seat in this in terms of the work that he's been doing through JETRO. Very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Masa, and thank you very much for agreeing to participate in this conference on Africa, Japan and the UK Emerging Partnerships Beyond Summits. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Vines, for the introduction. Everyone, well, I'm Masa Sudano, and as introduced, I can speak from two perspectives. I've been directly involved professionally in trying to promote Africa to Japanese businesses, more trade, more investment. And on the other hand, in addition, I grew up in Côte d'Ivoire when I was little. I've been living here as a diplomat as well. So on and off, I've been seeing what different types of Japanese and other companies have been active and successful in Africa. Today, I'll be talking about, in fact, an interesting topic, charting the shift towards private sector engagement in Africa. And this wasn't my topic, it was something that was asked upon from Chatham House, and it's quite interesting. Actually, this was quite intriguing to me. Charting the shift towards private sector. Well, you know, as a trade and investment promotion agency, the first thing you think is that most relationships start with the private sector. In fact, it's quite unfortunate in Africa is that the default interaction between Africa and external powers is governmental. Those governmental, they could be probably developmental assistance, or it could be government-to-government investment deals, involvement of state-owned enterprises. So you see this different, so even the fact that we have to be talking about private sector, getting the private sector on board, come to think of it, is quite bizarre. Why? Well, coming from the example of Japanese companies, seem even not outside of Japan, there's all these different types of companies. I mean, they are active. There are companies that's active in Africa. However, not all of them are necessarily, we don't have a whole array of the right type of companies. So on the first level, I don't want to discuss too much in detail, but there are those who are ethically, morally dubious ones, maybe, you know, very good relationship with an autocratic leader in Africa, in the DRC, former DRC, for example, working on dubious trade deals, investment deals. Those people do exist. On the second level, we have some of them in Japan too, but there are earnest but small businesses. So we have second-hand auto dealers. We have people selling, you know, other used products in Africa, artisanal mining. So those who are not necessarily bad people, but they're just not large enough partners to have any real effect on jobs or industrial development in Africa. Interestingly, on a third level, we jump towards the huge global MNCs. So we have, we have the ExxonMobils, the Procter & Gamble's, the Sino-Hydros, and the Hitachis, Toyotas of the world. It's characteristic, and when I interview these kind of large MNCs, Japanese ones, they are able to be in Africa because one, they have to be in all of the global market, and two, they can actually afford to create the backward linkages. They can afford to replace the infrastructure that's lacking, that's not being provided by the local host governments. They can afford to develop the human capital, train workers to get them on board. This is a kind of area where I think it's good to have, but oftentimes, I mean, we take it for granted that the companies must be providing all of this public service. So where do we go next? What we're missing, I think, especially in terms of Japanese companies, is the mid to semi-large companies with specialized products, whether they be printing presses, whether it be machineries, whether it be small oil services. Those companies, it's very professionally well-trained companies with a good start, with maybe market capital of a few $100 million to several $1 billion. Those companies, those Japanese firms, they are all over there in East Asia. They're all over in Western Europe, in US. Many of them have established a presence in India as well, but we don't see enough of them in Africa yet. There's several reasons for that. I think there is one is onus on the Japanese governmental side, people like myself, to be able to, we have to show to these companies is that there is money to be made in Africa, that there is demand for example, equipment to provide industrial products. On the other hand, though, there is indeed the problem of the lack of infrastructure, difficulties in certifying deals, government relations, these kind of human capital, these kind of things, these kind of inputs, which are not necessarily able to be provided by these mid-level specialized companies. Of course, we can't stop at that. We have to promote these companies. They are the people who are going to be partnering with local African businesses. In fact, I want to come up with a favorite example of mine. In Uganda, there was this local businessman who had been selling Japanese finished steel products for a long time. And then the tariff rates went up. His name is Mr. Iskander Lalani from the roofing groups. And he decided to actually bring on board the Japanese company Yodoko, which not large company, to actually help them design and work together a roofing materials factory in Uganda. Got money from the World Bank. And now those two together, they're actually providing steel materials to all of the Great Lakes region. So there are successful cases like that. But we need more of that. And this, I think, is where actually the UK can come in. UK itself is probably not, it's not a country with lots of medium-level specialized companies. The only exception I can think of are the Scottish oil services. I know that the representative of Scottish government is very active, based in Cape Town. But most of the time, most of the I think the large British ones are either very large companies like BP, or a group of consultants, private equity, lawyers, bankers, accounting firms, academics, think tanks like the Chatham House. But it is these people that I think where there's a potential for partnership. A lot of Japanese companies, they know what to do in terms of their own businesses. So they know how to make and engineer a printing machine, or they know how to make a machine that allows Africans to make toilet paper, a machine that allows Africans to weave mattresses for prayers at mosques. But those marketing is not easy. And there have been many cases already of Japanese companies actually partnering with UK institutions. One area I think that we already seen that is a startup ecosystem. Of course, these are not necessarily small Japanese companies, but there have been cases already encouraging partnerships. I think the B-Box with Mitsubishi, that's an off-grid solutions, mini-grid solutions, Winch with Itochu Corporation, Azuri with Marubeni. But these are still large Japanese companies. What we would like to see more, and where we as JETRO can work together with our counterparts in the UK, is to get get more of this mid to large level specialized Japanese and even non-Japanese companies trading and investing in Africa. And in many cases, I think British, UK institutions, whether they be private sector companies or be banks, lawyers, academics, even government institutions such as UK, UF, CPC, CBC. This is, I think, an area where there's more fertile partnership to be found. So to wrap it up, I think I have 1 more minute. I just think, so those are the areas that I think this is a new areas of development that we want to see. Tech, for example, is definitely one of that. But on the other hand, I also would like to mention that there is an onus, not just on external partners, but also on Africans as well. African governments especially. Oftentimes, sadly, I see them going to the easy solutions. Whether it's, of course, getting development assistance is good. Of course, sometimes state-to-state investment deals are good. But to deal with, to get the specialized mid to junior level companies coming in, there must be a basic level of predictability of business. Laws must be there. You can't make special exceptions for special cases. And of course, I think there are many, like for example, in Senegal or Ghana, there are countries which have been working very hard to improve the business environment. I think I've also seen very encouraging trends in South Africa, Angola, Nigeria, and Ethiopia as well. But I think this is where we need. This is not a criticism of certain countries. So even in the US or China or Russia, there are good. I'm sure there are good loads of good medium to top level specialized companies out there, just like they are for the Japanese. And I think it's imperative for the Africans to be able to create sort of a playing field where these types of specialized companies can feel at safe and get in business and partner with local firms and create jobs and new business opportunities. So thank you. That's all of my presentation.
Masa, thank you very much for that excellent charting of the shift towards private sector engagement in Africa, talking about the opportunities but also challenges that Japanese companies have, particularly looking also at where there are gaps, as you highlighted, the mid to semi-large companies in particular. There was one issue that I didn't hear you speak about, which has always struck me when dealing with Japanese companies, and that is risk appetite. The concerns about investing in Africa, and maybe in the Q&A we can explore if that's changing as more and more Japanese start to become more exposed to the African market, and also Japanese companies start to open offices more substantially within Africa itself. So that's something I'd be interested in hearing about. We have reasonable time. I'm delighted to say we have at least half an hour for a conversation. So what I'm going to do, because I see a few questions that have come into the Q&A box, rather than reading them out at this stage, let's hear some voices. So we have several questions by Dr. Ujenini Gideon Kihindi, and I wonder if we can unmute you, whether you'd like to answer those questions live to our panelists. So Dr. Ejenyi, we're going to try and unmute you and please ask your question. If you can't, then I will read them out.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead. You've been unmuted.
Hello?
You're most welcome.
Hello? Good morning,
You're most
sir.
welcome. We can hear you. Please ask your questions.
Good morning, sir. I have several questions here this morning. a situation whereby someone maybe from Nigeria have a business idea that is internationally accepted. How can someone be in partnership with international people?
Okay, so you're asking about how you can partner with an idea with internationals, yes? All right, I'm going to take a second question. So if we can unmute, there's a hand up. So it's Bolade, please. Go ahead, introduce yourself and ask your question.
Okay, I'm Bolade Enyila. I was actually asking if Kwapia was online because both of us have worked extensively on Japan and TICAD. The first question I need to ask is to my Japanese colleagues. Don't they think the international environment governing the TICAD process has changed significantly in the last couple of years? Because in the earlier days of TICAD, the driving principles were resource security, the quest for Japanese prestige, and access to market. I am not sure those governing principles still apply under the circumstances of today's political economy. The second question, it has to do with China. I have not seen anybody mention how China factors into this equation, given the very aggressive pursuit, especially in the infrastructure area, that China seems to be pursuing across the continent. Lastly, I've also not heard too much about the pull and push that post-Brexit environment will put the UK in terms of the pursuit of its economic interest within the continent. This push and pull factor, I'm wondering how it will relate within the overall trilateral configuration of EU, UK, and Japan. And now the UK itself will navigate between those push and pull effects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bolade. So I think we've got two, we've got a cluster of questions, China, push and pull, and also the evolution of TICAD. And we've also had the previous question, which was about how does an investor, such as one in Nigeria, get a good idea considered. So I'm going to go through the whole panel to have their responses to, you obviously don't need to answer every question. So I'll start with Professor Kitano, please. And then we'll move to Paul Arkwright, Folashade, and then Massa. Thank you very much. Professor Kitano. Ah, yes.
Yes. Oh, thank you very much for many questions. Let me just pick up several questions. The first, the TICAD. As I have mentioned, that now the TICAD is the positioning of business at the center of TICAD. So from the shift from the government-based like assistance to the private sector. But on the other hand, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the role of development cooperation, development assistance is still need to play a very important role, especially in the field of health sector and to fulfill the basic human needs to achieve the SDGs and to achieve the no one will be left behind. So the surely TICAD is I think transforming and both the role of private sector and also the role of the government are important, I think. And regarding China, I think that as Dr. Frashade kindly, emphasized the importance of diversification, and I think in this topic, the African ownership is the most important. How wisely utilize the external like financing. And also the role of international institutions such as IMF, the World Bank, could continue to support enhancing and increasing the capacity of, for example, the debt sustainability of African countries. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Paul Arkwright.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to the questioners. On the first one, if I understood it correctly, it's about how can we help to match overseas investors with projects, proposals, companies in Africa. I think that from a UK perspective, there are a number of ways of doing that. You normally have in country a UK Nigeria Chamber of Commerce or Business Council. There's a sort of group of private investors, private sector people who get together in country. There's always the British Embassy or High Commission, who usually have a Department of International Trade representative there, so getting into contact with them. And then I think the third bit is the online method, which I mentioned earlier, which is this deal room that the UK's Department for International Trade has set up with ASOCA Insight. And if you go onto their website, you'll see there are links and opportunities for both African companies who are looking for investors and investors who are looking for African companies to invest in. On China, I agree very much with what the professor has said about African ownership. The fact is, we need to be realistic. China is not going away in Africa. Indeed, China provides a vital service in Africa. You know, there are not many countries or companies that can roll out the kind of infrastructure which is definitely needed in Africa, other than China or Chinese companies. I think it's about how they do that business and what they do to bring others on board. And this goes to the triangulation point. I do think there are opportunities in the UK's case of picking up on what Massa was saying about our USP, our expertise in banking, accounting, project management, finance, and so on, to work alongside and with Chinese companies, for example, bigger infrastructure companies, to make sure that those infrastructure investments are sustainable, that they have the right kind of backing and regulatory frameworks and so on. So I think there's an opportunity there. There's a question about Brexit. I was waiting for that one. Yes, I think the UK is looking beyond the EU. We've always been a trading nation. There's a new focus on other opportunities beyond Europe. And Africa is one of those opportunities. And I think it was very much in the context of Brexit that Theresa May made her speech in Cape Town in August 2018. But that doesn't mean to say that we should drop our ties with the European Union or discontinue our collaboration with them. And I do think there are lots of opportunities working with the EU and Japan, as I said earlier, to collaborate and produce a stronger, more cohesive, holistic offer to Africa, while at the same time, picking up a point others have made about listening to what Africa needs, understanding those needs, and working with Africans and ensuring that Africa retains the ownership. So I'll leave it at that, Alex.
Thank you very much. The next one on the panel to answer is Folashade, and she's put her video on already, so she's rearing to go. Folashade, please.
Thank you. I will just answer Bolade's question on China. You're right, Bolade, when you say that China has deployed a very aggressive strategy, on the continent. And I think it's, if you look at it, from an African perspective or from the perspectives of African governments and actors, engaging with China is not about going the easy way for most of these countries. I think China offers funding, for infrastructure projects and other projects as well, and it's considered really in most of the national development plans of these governments as something that they consider to be central to their national development. Now, of course, you can unpack everything what's happening on the continent. There are questions related to technology transfer, sustainability, viability, and so on. But I think these are, you know, it's not a progressive, but the road that China is taking in Africa is one also that is of, you know, learning by doing. What I would just say also is that, and I think Professor Kitano mentioned it also, echoing my presentation, the need for diversifying partners, you know, in order to reduce a dependency. And so I think that what many African governments have been doing lately is really to look at where is it that they can get the best deal possible, and that will suit, you know, their national interests. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Masa, do you have anything to add to the discussion, please? You're on mute. You need to unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
Okay, briefly, regarding China, actually, in terms of Japanese companies' collaboration with Chinese companies, China in African development, I think actually many of them rely on the other side of the value chain as to the one Paul mentioned. So while British companies can be good at marketing, Japanese companies can be, sometimes I've seen them actually providing specific parts or services to large Chinese infrastructure projects. Interestingly, so we have a lot of Shanghai Mitsubishi made elevators in some Chinese built buildings, and I know that TOA is a sound system manufacturer, and their Chinese operation worked together with the builders of the Lagos LRT, for example. But those instances are still rare. The second one, I also wanted, in terms of accessing investment for individual African companies. Often, I would say outside of, say, startups where you get investment right away as a seed company, in many other, you know, day-to-day prosaic industries, I would suggest a more gradual step-by-step approach where we start partnering with African companies who are either customers or especially who could be retailers or who could be local agents to market, for example, Japanese. Special Japanese products. Then afterwards, this can move on towards the investment stage. So starting from trade could be a good start. And you know, as JETRO, we do have we hold a lot of events for business matching and networkings. Oftentimes on specific fields, such as agricultural equipment or medical equipment or startup technologies. On the third one, on Alex's point about risk appetite. In fact, I would like to turn this question in a different way. In fact, it was almost right for Japanese companies to be very risk averse because many of them did not know enough, did not have the right kind of expertise in Africa. Doing businesses in Africa is not easy. Well, actually, there is big rewards, but one must go through. One must be very aware of regulatory regimes, logistics, labor relations, regulatory issues, many other issues. Which is not very. I'm not saying this is very. Only Africa has this problem. It just happens that Japanese companies could navigate all of this in Southeast Asia. They also had the people to do. They also had the people to do it in India. Unfortunately, many of them just were totally ignorant. We were totally ignorant on how to do business in Africa, and we are still in a learning curve. This is where we need to find the right partners. One, whether it be the UK specialized companies, or two, it could be some local ones. Three, there have been many African diaspora in Japan. Many of them studied in Japan, maybe married Japanese partners. Started working for Japanese companies. So we need to get a better array of the right type of knowledge. And then it becomes reasonable for Japanese companies to be taking the risks. It has to be in the right order. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Masa. And so we'll have another round of questions. One of the questioners wants me to read out their question, which I will do. and then we'll unmute in a moment Bishop Richard Odok. So my colleagues, if you can arrange that. So the question that I'm reading out is by Tim Morris, who is a former British ambassador to several African countries, to Morocco and South Sudan, by the way. And he asks the following: it is in a way surprising that we in the UK and Japan have not found more opportunities to work together on aid-funded and development-orientated programs in Africa. Third country business cooperation has comparatively declined in the last 40 years, and perhaps business has lost the reflex. What top-level arrangements can be made to stimulate this? What about Japan making an investment in the private sector infrastructure group, for example? So that's one question. And the second one is from Bishop Richard Odok, and I'm hoping that we can unmute him so he can ask that question directly to our panelists.
I think I'm already unmuted. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Bishop. Please go ahead. Introduce yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
My question is simple. How can African countries deal with the new quest for foreign investment, competition in Africa, without attracting enemies in Europe and in Asia?
Thank you very much, Bishop. So there was therefore, I'm going to ask the panelists again to add their thoughts to those two questions, starting with Professor Kitano.
Oh, thank you very much for the question. Regarding the private sector and infrastructure development, I think it's a very important topic for Japanese companies. And I have attended the conference and a seminar regarding infrastructure finance among the Japanese major the construction companies. And for example, as I have just explained, I introduced the case of Shimizu Corporation and Gaist. So they are aiming at achieving the formulation of infrastructure maintenance contract, PPP type. So the model is coming from UK. So I think in that sense, I think we can learn a lot from UK and may have a collaboration between UK companies and Japanese companies to formulate the private sector infrastructure financing project in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do you have anything to add, Paul?
Yeah, on this one, there's a second question as well, which I assume you'd like me to just touch on.
Yeah,
I agree with Tim. It is rather surprising. I think that's sort of born out of the sense of competition rather than collaboration, which has perhaps prevailed over the past 30, 40 years. And I think it's a good idea to move beyond that. So Japanese contribution to investment in the private infrastructure development group, TICAD, would be an excellent move. And I think it would be good for CDC, the UK's sort of government investment arm, to look at ways in which they can collaborate in infrastructure projects. I know they're looking at those, in particular around renewable energy, for example, and there's a lot of synergies with Japan in that area. So yes, I think encouraging that. I mean, one way of doing this is going back to the summit theme is to see if it makes sense to have a high-level meeting between the UK, Japan, and African countries. That's not an official suggestion, as I'm no longer in government, but something that my former colleagues might want to look at. And then the question about are we attracting enemies in Europe and Asia? I go back to the point about competition. We are the UK is in competition with a number of countries, including in Japan. Let's not shy away from that. But I think the key is to really look with a cold eye at the opportunities, see where by working together we can add value to each other's offers, and then go forward with specific projects. So yes, we're in competition. I don't know about making enemies. It's a fact that the UK is now looking more and more at Francophone countries. Senegal's been mentioned a few times. Côte d'Ivoire is another with lots of investment opportunities. And likewise the French, I mean, Macron in Kenya and so on. So the French are looking at Anglophone markets. I think it's a question of working out a means by which we can all win, including and most importantly, Africa itself. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And Folashade, how do African countries avoid getting squeezed, being forced to make choices, either pro-West or pro-East, for example?
Yes, that's also how I got Bishop Richard's question. I think if you look at what's happening, African countries actually are welcoming foreign investment offers and are also trying, as I said in my presentation, to attract as much foreign investment as possible, especially in a context where they are in competition one with the other. I think in terms of economic, I won't say enemies, but yes, there's quite some competition going on there, and the problem comes when it is voiced maybe a bit too aggressively, as we've seen with some of the US officials coming to Africa and telling African leaders there that they should not engage with China, for instance, and criticizing China, which is which is actually a way of bringing the US-China competition to Africa. And I think that that's not very constructive. And I also think that it's not very fruitful, as a strategy, because on the other side, what African countries, first of all, I don't think that they will be listening and they will just continue to deal with China. But on the other hand, it can sound also very paternalistic, to come and tell someone on who to deal with and who not to deal with. So I think that is something that should be, discussed in a more diplomatic and more strategic way. Thank you.
Thank you very much for Folashade. And finally, Massa, any extra insights you want to give to this discussion?
Yeah, from my experience talking about competition, I think there's different types of competition. So sure, there certainly will be some superpower competition between the United States and, Sure, there will be some superpower competition between the United States and China and diplomatic security levels. But when we look at the level of, go down to the level of middling powers like the UK, like Japan or the UK, I mean, a lot of these competitions work out in the private sector level, private sectors. And within different companies, there are different groups of alliances. So in this area of renewable energy, there is a, in the UK perspective, there is a Winch, which is in competition with Azuri, which is in competition with Vivox. And the Japanese partners, Marubeni, which is in competition with Itochu, which is in competition with Mitsubishi. And similar things happen in the automobile industry, same in banks as well. So you got, Barclays, which partnered with ABSA in South Africa, which partners with SMBC in Japan. And their competitors are, again, a different slate of alliances. So perhaps I think we could probably be more relaxed about or have a different perspective on this competition. It's not necessarily about countries, and these individual companies, individual private sector firms, ally and compete with partners from different parts of the world. And I'm sure this applies to US and China as well. So I would say that, of course, as an end result, Japan might be vying for influence against Germany, France, or the UK, or South Korea. But I think on a step, if you look at the daily routines, I mean, a lot of these competitions are more entangled than a straightforward country versus country clash.
Great, thank you. We've got 3 more questions, and I'm going to add one, and then I think we'll probably have reached the time of that we've scheduled for this meeting. So the first question, if we can try and unmute him, is from Bertie Lombard. So the 3 questions that we're going to unmute, first it's Bertie Lombard, then it's Anne Moisan, and then finally the final question is Brian Mugabe. sorry, not Mugabe. Betty, please, over to you to ask your question. Betty Lombard.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning. I hope you can hear me.
Very clearly, thank you.
Well, I'm coming from a sunny South Africa, and thank you very much for this platform. My question was really around the Sustainable Development Goals, and how do we actually use this framework of a roadmap to assist in sourcing the right kind of investments across developing Africa. As we know, Africa is continuing to be, there's a growing significance of Africa being one of the more attractive frontier markets. And my concern is that there are a number of efforts that are going on that may lack in coordination. So my question really is, are the SDGs an appropriate wireframe to possibly guide more coordinated investment across Africa? And indeed, are the Sustainable Development Goals working in Africa? I'd be keen to hear the views of your panel.
Thank you very much, Bertie. And the next question is from Anne Moisan. Anne, over to you, please. Is Anne with us? If Anne is not, I will read the question out. Okay, so I'm going to read the question from Anne, which is, can the UK, Japan, or even UK, Japan compete with China as their costs alone seem to come in higher than China, who as a government-owned business seem to be able to underbid and come in lower costs? So that's a cost one, about is China just more competitive than the UK and Japan? And then the final question is from Brian Mugabe. Brian, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yes, thank you very much. Hope you're hearing me.
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you, Brian. Do introduce yourself.
Yes, I am Brian Mugabe. I'm from Uganda, but currently pursuing my studies in Russia. I'm doing my PhD at People's Friendship University. So my question is, being landlocked is affecting many poor African countries. Many poor African countries. Therefore, my question is, how would the Japan-UK partnership address this challenge?
Brian, thank you very much, and thank you for joining us from Moscow this morning. And I just have one question to add, which is that Bolajde talked about learning by doing in terms of African countries and their approach to summitry. And my question, I suppose, is to Professor Kitano, and maybe also to Massa and to Paul Arkwright in particular. Is there learning by doing in terms of summitry? So has TICAD, for example, learnt at all from FOCAC? And has the UK Africa Investment Summit, did it look at TICAD at all seriously in terms of design and thinking how it should be developed? So that's my question. So with no more ado, let me go to Professor Kitano and also make any wrap-up remarks that you wish to make at this point. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for a number of questions. So try to answer in short, the SDGs. In fact, at my university, I teach SDGs in the English program. And the students, although I don't have the students from African countries, but the students from developing countries are so enthusiastic to study, to learn about SDGs. I think that there are several important aspects. First is the principles, leave no one behind. So this concept is the synergy with the concept of human security. And it's very, very important and kind of backbone of SDGs. And to achieve the SDG, we need to measure. So we need to have a national or local, the indicator, the following up system, and international communities, for example, UNDP or UN, regional, organization, together with like World Bank and also bilateral, aid agencies could the support could to work together to build such a system in African countries, and also get together among African countries to achieve the regional goals. I think already have that system and can enhance. Secondly, the cost issues. I think usually in order to reduce the cost while to keep the quality, they try to get the high quality, good quality local companies, or to bring the engineers with high expertise, experiences with other developing countries. So through that way, could reduce the cost for like Japanese companies and landlocked countries. So similar to the issue of SDGs, to tackle the issue of most difficult issues, so no one will be left behind. So the human security concept, I have said that in my presentation that the human security is in the DNA of Japan Development Corporation. So I think that Japan can and also need to make more effort to support landlocked African countries. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Paul, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So SDGs, yeah, I do think it's a useful framework, not least because every country in the UN has signed up to them. There are measurements, there are monitoring mechanisms, and they can provide a guideline to investment. I think too often we forget what they are and need to remind ourselves what they are, but they are all about improving the lives and livelihoods around the world, and Africa is no exception to that. So yes, a useful framework. We do need to be a bit more specific about how we implement them when it comes to investments. That's what we were trying to do through the sort of sustainability theme of the UK Africa Investment Summit. We can't compete with China on price in the UK, but we can compete with them on sustainability, on quality, on respect for the rule of law, and I don't think we need to compete when it comes to the massive projects, but where, as I said earlier, where there are massive projects, then perhaps we can add value to those by bringing in our services and our expertise in finance and project management. Maybe we're short of time. Massa might want to address the third one about landlocked African countries. Learning by doing, an approach to summitry. We did look at other summits. We didn't want to replicate them, but there were certain things that we thought had worked well and other things which should work differently. But ultimately, our ministers wanted to ensure that this had something which was different, that had a specific UK brand and angle to it. And that meant that, for example, we didn't invite the whole of Africa. I'm sure lessons will be learned from the way that we did it. There were certainly improvements that could be made, and I like to think that my successors in that job will be looking at ways in which we can learn from other summits. So it's a very important point, and thanks for raising it. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Paul. Follow Shadi.
Yes, so I will not add to the answers already provided on the questions related to SDGs and landlocked countries. But what I would like to say about costs, I think yes, Chinese companies, Chinese actors are unbidding, and being successful in gaining many of these contracts. But I think one thing that should be noted as well is that in order for many African governments to be able to make sure that there's an enforcement of national environment and construction norms, but also questions related to labor and questions related just to the respect of international norms and also the SDGs. Very often in these projects, they tend to ask foreign cabinets or foreign what they call standards control offices, that are often French, Swedish, some of them coming from the US, to have this role of supervising the project. So it's difficult to negotiate. It's not always possible, but many countries, and I'm talking from experience, after organizing the Africa-China negotiators workshops. The first one was in October last year, but this has become an unwritten rule. So sometimes these projects, they look and they are promoted as totally Chinese, but when you start to unpack them, you will see that several actors, foreign actors, are also involved in them. And I think that it's interesting to look at this, from how these African governments are trying to get the best of all of these partners. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And the final remarks from Massa, please.
Okay, I'm going to talk about both the cost element and the inland corridors at the same time. I think Dr. Sule makes an excellent point. It's no longer just the unitary Chinese behemoth that's building it. In fact, China is a country that is developing by leaps every year. And right now, it's a middle-income country with a hyper-competitive, hyper-educated workforce who has just the right level of competitiveness to be building large infrastructure projects. I think only Turkey and potentially Mexico can compete with that. That being said, though, China, there's two factors at play. One is the COVID virus situation and sustainability of finances in Africa. It's more of an people call, sometimes the external people call it the debt trap issue. I don't call it that. I call it sort of a bad loans problem for China. And I think from now on, China, they'll be more selective in looking at the projects. In fact, this has already been the case, for example, with regards to the SGR, the standard gauge rail link between trying to connect Uganda and the Great Lakes region to the Indian Ocean. And there has been various negotiations, which I'm not privy to, but apparently the next stages, the loans for the next stages are not that forthcoming easily. And this is where we have to have innovative solutions. I think, for example, Japan, through JICA, we already engaged in a lot of feasibility studies and plan makings. We probably don't have the right types of companies to actually act upon that. However, we do have good financiers. We do have companies with specific expertise on particular sections of the bridge, for example. And I think the trend now is blended finance. So I think it's important for African governments and the private sector to take the initiative, get the different source the feasibility studies from different places, source the funding from different places, whether it's in multilateral institutions or individual donors or commercial banks, and then trying to get the different actual engineering companies to build the bits and pieces of the infrastructure. So I think that's the emerging trend: blended finance and combining different companies from external African and domestic industry. Just final note on Summitry. TICAD was, I think, the first initial summit that took place the first of the Africa +1 summits. Started out as a developmental thing, and it's moved on towards adding more business, academic, NGO elements to it as well. I think FOCAC has moved in the other direction. And I know there has been a lot of doing by learning, at least from distance as well. We've also, my colleague in Jethro London has also observed closely the UK Africa Investment Summit that Paul was talking about, and very specific focus, less pomp, full of substance, focus on the latest trends, including, for example, women entrepreneurs, the mixing of the diaspora. I mean, this has been very exciting. It's something that I think it was a very sophisticated symmetry that I think we in Japan must learn from going towards TICAD VIII. Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. So I want to thank our panelists today. So Professor Naoru Kitano, Paul Arkwright, Dr. Folashade Soli, and Masa Sugano. Thank you so much for all of you for participating, and to our audience also for tuning in globally for this discussion that we've had today. I'm very grateful for the questions that we've received, and I think we all have benefited on understanding better Africa, Japan, and the UK emerging partnerships beyond summits. So the bad news is we're over this morning, or this evening if you're in Japan, but the good news is that we have another session tomorrow. So tomorrow, same time, 9 to 10:30 GMT, we have a host of panelists talking about emerging fields and frameworks for engagement. My colleague, Dr. Shampa Patel, who's director of the Asia Pacific program at Chatham House, will be chairing that session. And I don't need to do a summary and wrap up right now of what we heard this morning or this evening, because I have my colleague Ben Shepherd, who's a consulting fellow at the Africa program, who will be doing that tomorrow. He will be bringing out what are the policy relevant, action orientated insights from the discussions over the 2 days and summing up the conference tomorrow. So thank you, everybody. And I hope you have a good evening, a good morning, and a good afternoon. This is Alex Vines, Director of the Africa Program at Chatham House, thanking everybody. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening.